On the Senate floor Wednesday, Senator Sherrod Brown touted recent legislative wins by the Biden administration. He noted that as the nation celebrated Labor Day earlier in the week, Democratic lawmakers have been passing legislation to benefit the American worker. The Ohio Democrats specifically named the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. The bipartisan CHIPS Act set aside $52 billion to boost domestic semiconductor research and production. The Inflation Reduction Act is a $430 billion scaled-down version of the Build Back Better bill.
Earlier this week, we celebrated Labor Day, a day when Americans come together to honor the people who make this country work. Whether you punch a clock, whether you swipe a badge, whether you earn a salary, whether you make tips, whether you're caring for children or an aging parent, all labor has dignity. When work has dignity, hard work pays off for everyone, no matter who you are, where you live, what kind of work you do. Yet we know for so many Americans, their work simply doesn't pay off like it should. Look at what's happened in Minnesota and Ohio and Rhode Island, and I know Senator Grassley's coming out in Iowa. Look what's happened over the last 30 and 40 years. Executive salaries have soared. CEO pay is up 1,300% since 1978, 1,300%. Corporate profits risen, stock prices up, workers more productive than ever before. But for decades, wages barely budged. For most Americans, their purchasing power has largely been flat for some 5 decades because Wall Street rewards corporations that raise prices without raising paychecks. Wall Street rewards stock buybacks. Wall Street rewards union busting. Wall Street really rewards shipping jobs overseas. Wall Street rewards automating jobs. Wall Street rewards outsourcing full-time in-house work to contractors. Wall Street analysts actually downgrade stock prices when American companies invest in American workers in American production. If a company owns a new factory in Ohio, Wall Street might often downgrade its stock. If that same company instead buys back its own stock, sending 40% of the returns to foreign investors, Wall Street rewards it. We work to change that. For the first time in far too long, we have a government on the side of workers. We have a dues-paying union member as labor secretary. Madam President, contrast this labor secretary, laborers union activist, carried a union card before he came, I think he still does, as Secretary of Labor. Contrast that with the Trump Secretary of Labor, who worked for one of the major world leaders in union busting, who made millions of dollars a year by busting unions. We took on big oil. We have a National Labor Relations Board actually looking out for workers and willing to go after union busting. We passed the most pro-worker infrastructure bill ever, the strongest Buy America provisions ever in a piece of legislation. We've taken historic steps to put workers first, to invest in American workers, to make our economy work for every American, not just CEOs, not just Wall Street. That's what you came to the Senate from Minnesota for. That's what Senator Whitehouse came from Rhode Island for, to make these fights. We passed the CHIPS Act to bring our supply chains home, to bring down prices for American families, to create thousands, tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs in Ohio and across the country. This groundbreaking, it's that President Biden and I and Congressman Ryan and others are going to do this Friday in Licking County, Ohio, will mean, at a minimum, 5,000 good-paid union building trades jobs: carpenters, electricians, pipe fitters, laborers, ultimately millwrights, so many others, at least 5,000 over the next 2 or 3 years that will last at least 10 years. Passing the CHIPS Act brings our supply chains home to bring down prices for American families. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, taking on 3 of the most powerful specialist interests in Ohio and in Washington. We took on the big drug companies, big pharma, to bring down drug prices. We took on big oil to lower energy prices and create jobs, union jobs in the industries of the future. We took on Wall Street, finally taxing stock buybacks that reward CEOs and executives at the expense, always at the expense, Madam President, of workers and jobs. These are big wins for workers. Together, the biggest steps we've taken in decades to create an industrial policy that puts our most valuable resource, American workers, first. It counters the business model where corporations hopscotch the globe in search of lower wages and lower wages and lower wages. From the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, we lay down a new marker. The technology of the future, from semiconductors to batteries to electric vehicles, will be developed in America, made in America by American workers. Hasn't been easy, our work's far from finished, but I'm optimistic. I see more momentum behind the labor movement than any time in my career. All over the country, more and more workers are seeing that unions are the best way to have a voice, from Starbucks to Amazon. 70% of Americans, I don't ever remember it being that high, 70% of Americans approve of unions, for sure the highest level of support in 50 years. More people than ever want to join a union. They know that carrying a union card, it means higher wages, it means better benefits, it means better working conditions, it means more control, particularly for young families or families taking care of an aging parent, more control over your schedule. We know what workers are up against when they organize. Corporations unleash all their power to fight their own workers, too often illegally. It's why I'll never stop fighting to pass the PRO Act to finally level the playing field between workers and corporations and union organizing. This week, we honor the workers who built this country. We recommit ourselves to the fights ahead, because when work has dignity, every American is paid the living wage they've earned. When workers have dignity, all workers can afford child care and health care and housing. When workers have dignity, American workers have retirement security and paid leave and power over their schedule and their lives. Because when you love this country, you fight every day for the people who make it work. That's what the labor movement has done for a century. It's what I'll continue to do. Madam President, I ask that the following remarks be placed in a different part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask my colleagues to join me in honoring Ohioan David Kiska, a Korean War vet, a tank commander, a decorated war hero. Mr. Kiska served our country by enlisting in the Army and fighting in Korea. He fought bravely in the Battle of Outpost Harry and many other battles, that battle one of the most devastating in the war. And after 8 days, he and his fellow soldiers prevailed, securing a strategic military route despite being significantly outnumbered. The Battle of Outpost Harry is remembered as an outstanding military feat of the Korean War. When David returned home to Ohio, he worked at the Thew Shovel Company in Lorain and raised a family. His service to our state and to fellow veterans never ended. He became a director of the Lorain County Veterans Services, where he worked for 20 years as head service officer. Ohio is blessed in our 88 counties that each of our 88 counties has a veterans service officer. Cuyahoga or Franklin has dozens of people serving. In small counties like Benton and Noble, maybe only one veteran service officer, but they're always there every day to serve veterans. David wanted to make sure in that job that every veteran received his or her full benefits, regardless of when and where they served their country. He helped with paperwork. He supported veterans through career transitions. For David, the job never ended there. He took veterans out to lunch, paying out of his own pocket often. He visited sick and injured vets just to keep them company, a friendly face to help through hard times. Every Memorial Day, he volunteered to put American flags on the graves of veterans. It's how David Kiska lived his life. He fought with bravery. He gave back selflessly. He fought with bravery. He gave back selflessly. Our thoughts are with his family. We recommit ourselves, as we did with the Heath Robinson PACT Act. We recommit ourselves to following his example of serving those who have sacrificed so much for our country. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I know that Senator Grassley will speak in a moment. These are the wrap-ups. If I could, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration. The Senate proceed to S-Res 737.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 737, designating August 10th, 2022 as Toxic Exposure Awareness Day.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent when the Senate completes its business that adjourn until 10 a.m. on Thursday, September 8th, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. The Journal of Proceedings be approved to date. The time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. Morning business be closed. And that upon the conclusion of morning business, the Senate proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the Mathis nomination post-cloture, and that all post-cloture time of the nomination be considered expired at 11:30 a.m. Further, following the vote on the Mathis nomination, the Senate resume consideration of the Mendoza nomination, that the cloture motions filed during yesterday's session ripen at 1:45 p.m., and then at 1:45 p.m. the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the Mendoza nomination. Finally, if any nominations are confirmed during Thursday's session, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be notified immediately of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order, following the remarks of my colleague from Iowa, Senator Grassley.
Without objection.